today's video I'm going to be making a model of Raziel. Now, for those of you that have been following along, you will know that I very recently completed a model of Kain. The final piece of which I am really thrilled with. I think it looks really cool. I'm really thrilled with some of the detail work that I did on that piece. I'll link it in the description below so you can go and see that if you haven't seen it already. But the final piece I was really proud of. The process, however, was a bit prickly. Every time something difficult came up or something in which it would involve me using a skill I'm either not familiar with or maybe just not confident in, it stalled me for weeks, and it really kind of meant that a project that could have maybe taken me a month to complete instead ended up taking closer to 3. And that's something I'd very much like to address in this particular build. Now, as I've been kind of talking, you've already seen some shots of me adding the black matte spray paint to the model to kind of give it a nice kind of foundation to work on. This one was printed in clear resin, and so I found it very hard to read the model in terms of the details, because obviously the light was refracting its way through the clearer resin, and it meant that there were certain pieces that I couldn't tell the quality of the print. So decided to do exactly the same as I did with Kain, and I've spray painted the base pieces black. The one piece I haven't done that with, however, is the Reaver blade itself. I've kept this one clear for now. I'm hoping, and this is going to be one of those hurdles that I was talking about, in which it might involve me using skills that I'm not familiar with, or maybe techniques that I'm not fluent in, to try and get the look that I'm wanting for this. But I want to try, if I can, to kind of still create that spectral looking blade, rather than painting it a solid colour. I'd much rather have it so it still looks a little translucent, in the hope that it looks more like the Reaver from the games, a bit more spectral, a bit more ghostly. I have also I haven't glued anything together, but I have also fitted the model to try and see if the joints themselves fit together nicely. And I'm pleased to say, for the most part, that is the case. You know, there's a little bit of a gap here, but there's maybe wiggle room in this joint sort of to actually move away some of the resin and actually get that to sit in a little bit better. But on the most part, there are no overt gaps. There are, to what I can see currently, there's going to be very little that I need to kind of compensate for with clay like I did with Kain. So for that, I'm really thrilled. As you can see, the model is crazy impressive. Like, I cannot wait to see it fully painted. But I think it will very immediately trump the Kain is the biggest model I've ever painted thing, because just the sheer scale and the sort of how dynamically posed he is, he takes up more space than Kain does, for definite. So I'm really looking forward to this. I'm very excited to see it done, and hopefully I can achieve a similar level of detail to what I did with Kain. So first step is obviously going to be applying the base colours, which for Kain was sort of one of the longer pieces of the project. Once I actually had those base colours down, it was so much easier to get through the detail work. But a couple of things before we kind of really get into it. The colour palette is something that I've been deliberating on quite a lot. Obviously, for those of you that know Raziel, those of you that played the game, his skin is effectively blue. And I like it, you know, obviously that's something that I want to try and maintain. Ultimately, I want it to sell as Raziel. But I really don't want I don't want too vibrant a blue. I've seen a few people who've done paint jobs on this particular model, and the blue can be a bit garish. So I kind of want to take exactly the same approach as I did with Kain, and take the colour palette and just knock it back a little bit so it's not as cartoony, for want of a better word. So this, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting the skin in a sort of maybe a greyish, ever so slightly blue-grey tone, and slowly pick the colour up as we go, maybe dry brushing or adding sort of like washes over the top to just sort of pick the colour up. Like I say, I don't want him to be like Smurf blue, but I also don't want to lose the blueness in his skin tone, because obviously it's a key piece in recognising Raziel as a character. But obviously he's kind of like that corpse blue, so that's kind of it's what I'm aiming for to begin with. But obviously exactly the same as Kain, I'm going to have to paint the family crest on the scarf wrap that Raziel wears around his neck, which obviously is going to be a hurdle. It's another one of those things that I don't want to be put off by. But yeah, so exactly the same process as before. I'm going to start whacking on some base colours, in the process, try and find Raziel's skin colour, so that it's, like I say, I wanted to still sell as Raziel, but there's a couple of things that I want to avoid. I don't want any of the colours to be too garish, because ultimately he's been, for want of a better phrase, decomposing in the Well of Souls or whatever for like 1,000 years. He's not going to be bright anything. So I've got some preferences that I'd like to kind of try and put onto the model, but like I say, base colours first, and then we'll see where we are after that. So just a quick sort of moment here. The skin colour kind of came together exactly the way I wanted it to first time. I'm very surprised, in all honesty. I went through a few different kind of colours. Obviously, I've got paints all over the room, but initially I was looking for that grey tone that I talked about in the beginning. Then I went to try and go for like darker blues, and then sort of like dust that with sort of like paler colours like greys and whites, maybe to sort of like lift the colour, but leave that deeper tone in there. I also looked at some of the original sort of character models for Raziel, and like some of them have like a purpley hue to them. And so I kind of also thought about using a darker purple and then pulling the colour out like the same way, sort of using dustier, paler colours to try and find where Raziel's skin colour was. But in the end, I just used I have a set of smaller paints that to be honest with you, I haven't really used in a while, and I haven't looked at in a while either. And it's called Underdark Indigo. It's a colour from a box of Dungeons & Dragons miniature paints. And yeah, turned out perfect. It's a dusky blue. It's, there's a brightness to it for now, which, I'm fine with. But yeah, it just has, I feel like as a base colour, it has all the qualities I was looking for. It's kind of, like I say, dusky greyish, but the blue is still very apparent in there, which I really like. For now, I've done a single coat of it, because I actually think that being able to see through some of the brushstrokes and actually kind of get that black kind of undercoat be present, I don't know, it gives him a mottled kind of like incomplete look, which I think is really good. Obviously time will tell whether I decide to kind of go against that and decide to add a second coat in places, but I think the paint itself has gone on really nicely. And yeah, I'm really, as a base, I'm really thrilled with it. So for the time being, I'm just going to leave it alone, and I'm going to start doing sort of like the brown and tan colours on like the leatherwork and the cloth. But as a start, it went far, far better than I anticipated. So more to do, but a good start. So I don't think I could actually be any happier with how this set of base colours has gone on. They are perfect, and a lot of them were kind of chosen accidentally and impulsively, which is an interesting lesson, I think. I think kind of going back to kind of what I talked about Kain at the beginning, I think to a degree there was a painstaking amount of sort of like mental planning, making sure that I got colours right, making sure that I knew what order I was going to paint things in. Whereas very differently to that, Raziel has kind of been a little bit seat of the pants, to be fair. You know, I didn't kind of pick any preference for how I was going to paint them, like what order I was going to paint them in. Base colours were sort of like picked off the shelf and like, yeah, that'll work. Obviously the skin colour was slightly different, where I had kind of broader concerns about it looking wrong. However, I think as the model itself speaks for at this point in time, it looks like Raziel, you know? Like the colours really came together in a really big way. I think one thing worth mentioning though is I think I'm going to stick to a single coat for Raziel. Kain had multiple coats of paint on basically every part of him. I think the only one of the bigger parts he didn't have that one was his hair. I wanted that kind of like mottled kind of texture to his hair so that it looked right, it looked more believable. However, Raziel, having the sort of like the streakiness on certain parts of it, like even the cloth work and the leather wraps and all of that kind of stuff, adds a kind of grime to him that I think really works. So I don't foresee me at this point wanting to go back on my ideas of doing multiple coats of paint. I think I may just leave it at the one because, like I say, texturally, it's really helping bring him together. So next is my personal favourite part of any project, which is adding the details in. So beginning to be a little bit more kind of intentful? I don't think that's a word, but a little bit more direct with colour placement and adding sort of washes of black to add a little bit of depth to the model. And then ultimately dry brushing each piece with sort of a couple of different colours to accentuate different parts. To really bring the model to life, hopefully. I do think I want to start with the torso piece, because for anybody that's got a good look sort of as I've been filming, unlike the character model, this has a few extra details, and it's his spinal column. There's a lot of protruding bone and ribs and things like that, and that's one thing that I'm a little bit... I don't entirely know how it's going to look, but I would like to have some of those bones protrude, and so I can add this ivory colour into parts of the rib cage and the spine. Obviously, like I say, it's a big deviation from the character. The character pretty much is exclusively that sort of like drowned skin look, you know, that blue, kind of blue, whitey grey look. So this is a big deviation, but I think it will pay off in the end, having that slightly more realised look to Raziel. So that's where I would like to start. I'm planning on adding some sort of darker brown washes to the scarf and the wraps along the arms. But then after that, it's just sort of, like I say, adding little bits of wash of detail to kind of accentuate angles on the model. And once I get to dry brushing, I think much like Kain, the model will just spring to life. So this is probably one of the more time-consuming parts of the build. This is the bit where I really kind of get super focused on what's happening in and around the model, or what could have happened before we saw Raziel here. So like if he's scuffed or covered in mud, or, you know, that kind of thing, or the blood spatter from Kain. You know, this is the time that I start thinking about those things. But like I say, it is my favourite bit, so I'm really excited to get started. So I'm going to start with that spinal column first, and then just procedurally work my way through each and every piece. So one of the most interesting things, I think, about doing this project this time around has been just how quickly Raziel has come together in comparison to Kain. Like I've said numerous times, Kain took, I'm sure it was the best part of 3 months to do, because I kept on putting myself off and leaving it for weeks on end. However, this time, I think Tuesday coming marks a month of working on Raziel, and he's just coming together so quick. I literally have like 3 jobs left to do on it, and that's it, we're finished. So I am really, really pleased. I'm going to stop kind of showing him in his full kind of constructed self, because it's going to start getting to the point where that's going to detract from the reveal at the end of the episode. But yeah, just to sort of like talk about a few things as we go, I think one of the biggest lessons for this has been, one of my biggest concerns, I suppose, was colour. That was one of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning of this that was a real concern. I thought it was going to be a huge obstacle. However, finding this little set of paints has literally been a game changer. The paint I'm using now to paint the actual Reaver blade itself, it's one I actually used on the Cult of the Lamb model that I showcased in my 2024 review. Basically, it's sort of like a candlelight kind of paint, but it's a luminous, ever so slightly translucent yellow paint. And so I kind of feel like initially this was going to be one of my bigger concerns, because I thought to begin with I was going to have to water down some paints, or maybe submerge this in sort of like some, like, I don't know, maybe like a coloured sort of liquid, and sort of like try and dye it so I could maintain that translucency. But again, it's just been a simple matter of finding the right paint and just running with it, because this already, as I'm just sort of applying it here, feels right. You can ever so slightly see through it, and if I'm careful with the coats that I apply to it, I think I'll end up with the look that I'm going for. But yeah, just to sort of quickly summarize this next section, really, really thrilled. The detailing that has gone onto Raziel, it came to me so easily, and maybe that is because I've kind of already done it once already with Kain. I've already kind of been here with this type of model, and I've already, I know what to expect. The imperfections in the model aren't really putting me off this time, mostly because there aren't any. But yeah, the dry brushing, the detailing, those sort of darker washes underneath the dry brushing, like, it's brought it all together so quickly, like I say. So, like I say, I'm down to 3 bits left, and one of them is a difficult bit, and, well, this is one of them. But I think the one that I'm going to tackle next is the family crest on Raziel's scarf, simply because I like the idea of having Raziel completed before I tackle the base. So that's just going to be a slow and steady, meticulous job of, trying to almost draw out the shape of it first before I paint it on. Again, very similarly to how I did with Kain. But I think now's probably a good time to mention the base. I have absolutely no idea what it's supposed to be. It is quite clearly one of the pillars of Nosgoth that has sort of like tipped to one side, and Raziel is kind of like stood atop it, which I think is going to look very cool. However, there's these sort of like weird rib-like protrusions, and then kind of just a sort of mucky textured lump of potentially dirt or soil or sand or something like that. So I don't really know, like the ribs just sort of like feel weird, like has the pillar fallen over and crushed something and then over time that's decomposed, so there's just sort of like ribs sticking out of the ground? Or is it, I don't know, it doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. So I think I am going to have to kind of improvise as best I can. But yeah, that's going to be the final job. I think it's something I just like to do. I like to have the character painted first, and then I'll move on to the base and sort of final assembly. But yeah, so at this point I really have very little idea what the base actually is going to look like. I do know that if there is any kind of fine marking on there that tells me which pillar of Nosgoth it is, obviously I will paint that appropriately. Otherwise, I will just sort of like find one that I think has a nice design to it, or maybe a nice colour that contrasts Raziel himself, and then paint that accordingly, because like I say, at this point I'm struggling to read it, so if it kind of comes to it and I'm really struggling, I'm just going to kind of make the best of it as I can. So yes, first things first is dealing with the crest, obviously finishing this off, dealing with the crest on the scarf, and then we will move forward with the base, final assembly, and the reveal. Long last, Raziel is complete. I am so proud of what I've done with Raziel. I think he looks really good. The base, kind of the same story as Kain, to be fair. It is the weakest part of the model for sure. And I mean that mostly from a print quality standpoint. There's so many kind of like rough textures and cracked resin, and you know, initially I kind of hoped that that would work in the model's favour, using some of the textures to my advantage to kind of like portray the relevant kind of texture, be it like bone or stone or whatever it is. However, that didn't entirely turn out to be true. Certain parts of it, they just look damaged and or of a low quality, which is a shame. It really is a shame, because the actual character himself, like Raziel himself, looks fantastic. I'm so pleased with it. Like the quality of the print itself, and then the paint job that I've done on top. I'm really pleased with how it all came together. And I think it's super fun seeing the two of them side by side as well, because I'm beginning to notice that I think I have a style of painting these models. It's something that I've always kind of queried, whether it's something you can have in terms of, you know, can you tell that the model was painted by me? And I think having these two sat side by side together, you can see the kind of duskier colours, the sort of high use of the textures on the model and stuff like that. They all seem to be like signatures maybe of what I'm trying to do, which I'm beginning to really enjoy that. So that's super cool. So obviously next up, I am going to be doing the reveal and concluding the video. However, there's a little thing I thought I'd tag on to the end of this. Obviously, these two characters, I love them both, and I really enjoyed painting them and kind of like looking into their character models and sort of, studying the characters a little bit before I painted them. However, I have never played Soul Reaver. Never. My first exposure to Soul Reaver was through my dad. He played Soul Reaver 1, 2, and Defiance. I don't believe he ever played Blood Omen. I might be wrong about that, but I don't think he did. And that was my first exposure to them. And for a long time, my only kind of actual hands-on time with Soul Reaver was a PlayStation 1 demo disc that was one part of Soul Reaver, and I just played it over and over and over again, just throwing javelins at vampires and being thrilled that they stuck inside them if your aim was good. So that's literally it. Aside from that, in the years kind of past that, my whole experience of this storyline is via wiki pages, YouTube, watching cutscenes and gameplay and stuff, and that is my whole experience of Soul Reaver. I have never actually had the time or the availability of console to kind of go back to it until very recently, in which the Soul Reaver 1 and 2 remaster came out. So as a bit of a reward to myself for finishing both of these models, I am going to go and experience Soul Reaver 1 and 2 for the first time, hopefully from start to finish if I don't get stuck on a block puzzle somewhere. But yeah, I just thought it was a funny thing that obviously, I think you can make certain assumptions about somebody if they're painting models of things. But yeah, I have never ever played the games, so I'm really excited to actually get to it and play them. So for now, I'm going to leave this where it is, and I'm going to film the reveal for Raziel. And stay tuned, because there is a project kind of prepped and ready to go very shortly. I'll be beginning work on it very shortly. And it still has that nostalgic feel to it, so I have high hopes for it. But thank you very much for watching this. It means a lot if you've watched the whole thing. And yeah, enjoy the reveal.
Kain is deified. The clans tell tales of him. Few know the truth. He was mortal once, as were we all. However, his contempt for humanity drove him to create me and my brethren. I am Raziel, firstborn of his lieutenants. I stood with Kain and my brethren at the dawn of the Empire.